Hey everybody, today I am going to be doing a track walkthrough on this new track that I started probably about 2 weeks ago. Um, and I think I'll open up another project towards the end. But I'm just going to be talking about some basic mix concepts, techniques that I use to get a wider mix, to try to make sure everything's has its own place, techniques to get a really clean sub sound. So let's start out by listening to a little bit of this track. It has a long intro, so I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. Computer's kind of being slow right now. Let's check out the next section. Alright, that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on here. So to start out, I'm gonna start with one of the most basic pieces of mixing advice I could give, and that is pretty much high pass everything. So take a EQ everything that isn't the sub, and this is or the kick. Sometimes I'll let my snares have a little bit too, but basically you don't want a lot going on in the sub bass except for the sub bass, and you only want one thing going on down there at a time. It's very hard to get things to work together and play nice down there. So I like to use FabFilter Pro Q2. The 3 is out now. I don't have it, but it looks great. Can't wait to get it. I like to go to 18, 24, even 30 sometimes, which is just a steeper filter. You can see, I'll leave this one on 18. So let's find an element and I'll show you why I do that. So here we have this bass guitar riff. And I'm not using this as my sub bass. I did let a lot of low mids in, but I high passed at 83 hertz. So you can kind of see down here there is some content being cut out that would kind of muddy up the sub region a bit. I might even make this filter a little more steep. And also on this one, even though this sounds like a really high frequency noise, you wouldn't really think that you need a high pass filter. I still do it just to be safe. Like, you never know. This is what I used on it. It's been bounced out since then, but I'll show you. So really we're just taking a little bit of the low mids out. But it's still good practice to just do this to pretty much everything that isn't your sub to make sure that you don't have random things down there that you don't know about muddying things up. Especially when you don't have a good sub reference for your studio, so you might not catch it, you might not hear it. And that, I think, is a good segue to talk about just kind of subtle widening things that you can do. So, like, I don't know if you noticed, but in this version, before I bounced it, this other version has a little bit of reverb that I put on it, and it also is going to the stereo delay send, which this is the Logic stereo delay. You could use Ableton ping pong or whatever. I have it set to ping pong, so it's bouncing back and forth between the right and left channel at the rate of a fourth note. And I love to do this. It's a great way to get some subtle widening to pretty much anything in your mix. So when I play by itself, it'll be really obvious. But in the context of the mix, it's not gonna shine through that much, but I still feel like it is adding kind of some depth to the mix. So let's check that out. Okay. So now I want to talk about when you have two things that are kind of fighting for the same area of your mix. So in this intro here, I have this Rhodes and I have this bass guitar riff, and without EQ on them, here's the original, or I'll just go back here to this. So here's the original of the bass without effects, with the Rhodes without EQ or any effects. They kind of are trying to be in the same area, not like super hard, but a little bit. So basically what I did is on the sub bass, or on the bass guitar, I cut this area, which is where the Rhodes is. We can kind of see if we pull up this. The Rhodes is really heavy right around here. So I made a dip in the sub bass, or in the bass guitar, so we're getting mainly the highs from the bass guitar, and then for this purpose in the section I boosted the sub content in the bass guitar riff, but that cuts out right here as soon as I have some 808s come in to make space for those. So basically you want to, like, if you have two things that are kind of in the same range but have content in other ranges, you kind of got to pick or choose and carve a little bit of space into one of them to make room for the other, to make your mix a little more comfortable, a little less muddy. So that's something I try to think about a lot. So another thing I'm going to talk about is separating your sub bass from your bass growls. That's something I pretty much always do. Some situations it is kind of makes more sense to have it together if like the sub moves exactly the same as the bass growl, if there's like a pitch bend or something that makes it more cohesive. But what I find is, especially in like your bass growl noises, you get a lot of like sawtooth waves, square waves. Those waves tend to not sound that great as sub, or not as thick. So what I'll do is we'll talk about this growl right here. So I basically take my growl. I'm not going to go into the sound design of this. I made it in a different project, just a sound design project, and grabbed it into here. I'll probably go into detail on stuff like that in other videos, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to talk about what I did to make this fit into this track. So here's just the growl layer by itself. You can hear it doesn't really have any sub. It's got some low bass. I started with this EQ, cut the sub out of it, hardcore. I don't really think I needed 3 bands for this, but just worked, sounded okay, so I stuck with it. Then I put this plugin Haze on it, which I've really been loving a lot lately. Here, I'll take all the processing off just so we can go through each one. Here's it without anything. So that's thick and nice, but it didn't really fit in the track how I wanted it to. So with DQ, takes out the sub. With Haze, this is basically multi-band widener. So this would be panning left, panning right, based on how high you pull that. And these are all the bands, like 11 kilohertz here, 600 hertz, all the way down and up. And a lot of stereo widening tools really don't sound good to me. They sound, metallic or just thin. But this one sounds super natural, and I've really been digging it. It's super smooth. Can't recommend this plugin enough. So here's without Haze and with Haze. You can tell it just gets a lot more stereo information there. I might kind of tone it down a little bit. Oh, there we go. So I'm really happy with this plugin. I'll link this in the description too. Definitely one to look into. Then I added a phaser, kind of get some movement. It doesn't sound that good on its own, but I felt that it did fit in the track. Then I used this Pultec EQ emulation from UAD. Old style EQs like this, I usually try to use more as like saturation, whereas like a newer EQ like FabFilter Pro Q is more transparent. So this I have set to 3000 hertz to boost 4 dB. So it's just kind of exciting the high end a bit. Here's with it. It's subtle, but it brings out the high end a little more. And next I used Fat Effects to add some distortion, some soft saturation there, and then it's also the compressors engaged. So that is going to beef it up a lot. It's just a little thicker. And then I added another EQ to kind of control it and excite the high end even more. And I know that kind of just makes it sound more brittle and frail when we're just listening to it by itself, but in the context of the mix, I felt that that helped a lot. And next, this plugin Texture, which I love, been using it so much lately from Devious Machines. It basically listens to whatever you put through it, creates this envelope for it, and adds whatever noise you want over it. I usually use the white noise. They have a bunch of presets. You can load your own sounds in, but I love that it makes it choppy and stuff. It matches the waveform of whatever you put it to. I'll usually go into the Texture EQ, and EQ the sub bass out of the white noise. I don't really want the white noise in my sub. This will add the sub in if it's after the EQ. So this is just EQing the noise Texture is adding. And then I turn the mix way down, the gain down, so it's kind of subtle, but you can hear it's adding noise. Which, again, by itself maybe doesn't sound that pleasant or good, but in the context of the mix, I think it's really important. Thickens it up a lot. So, and here's without. Just makes it kind of more present, you know. So now I'll talk about how I add the sub back in. So here's with the sub layer underneath. There's just the sub layer. I use this sub from Contact Retro Machines, which I like a lot. It's a Native Instruments library for Contact. If you go Retro Machines, Analog Machines, Sub Bass 2 is the one I use. I've edited a bit for my preset and named it Sub Bass Ovoid, but it's basically the same as the Sub Bass 2. I like this one a lot because it's saturated, but it's still like a clean sine sub, but it's still got a lot of warmth and content in the mids and highs that you can use, and just all around sounds thick and nice. So I use that in almost every track. It's a great sub. And next, that can bring us into talking about reverb tails. Reverb tails are really important for making your songs have a lot of space and sound big, you know. So here's this one. So what I did was I used this reverb in Reactor Space Master 2. I love it. It's great. And I just bounced out this noise, but with the wet all the way up on Space Master, and got this. And then after that, I added an EQ, which is really important because as much as you need to use big reverb tails, they'll also tend to be the first thing to kind of mess your mix up if you're not careful with the content in them, if they have too much low mids or if they're too loud or all sorts of things. So I cut a lot out on this high pass. I went up to 475 hertz and might even put it at 18 now. So you can see it's taking a lot of the low mids out of the tail. Put the Pultec on it again, boosted the highs a bunch to brighten it up, and then compressed it a bunch with this compressor that I love, can't recommend enough. Kotelnikov from Tokyo Dawn Labs. It's free. I'll link it in the description. Everybody should get this. It's about the most transparent compressor I've ever used. I use it in mastering and mixing. It's great. So that's just kind of crushing it all down so it comes through better in the mix. You can just kind of makes it last longer, which is nice. So that's what I have to say about Reverb Tails. Let's talk about the plugin Haze a little more. So here's the Rhodes. My Soundflower app is messing up. 1 second. I'm going to restart it. Okay, there we are. So here's the Rhodes. Let's listen to it without Haze. So it's mono now. It still sounds good. In the context of the mix, it sounds a little weird when it's in mono, I was thinking, so. It just kind of sticks out a little more. It's not as fluid with the mix. So here's with Haze on. Just kind of fits in more, is more seamless. I'll switch it on and off here a bit. Yeah, so that's a widening tool that I love to use. I'm gonna go over some simple techniques that I like to do to get a more natural widening than using actual stereo wideners and stuff. A lot of times, my hi-hats are a big way that I'll subtly widen up my mixes. So let's listen to my drum section here. So you can hear that the closed hi-hats are panned left and the open ones are panned right. And I'm using Addictive Drums for these hi-hats. It's a great plugin. A lot of these plugins that are sampled drum sets will already have the hi-hats panned a little bit, one way or the other, when you just open it and use it normally, because the idea is that drums are kind of panned from where you're sitting playing a drum kit. So Superior Drummer, Native Instruments, Studio Drummer and stuff, all those drum kits, usually the drums are naturally panned a little bit. And usually the natural panning that they have built in sounds really good. So what I did for this was I bounced out my closed hi-hats. And I left those to be panned the way that they normally were with the drum kit. And then I bounced out my open hi-hats. But on that bounce, I put this gain plugin, just the Logic utility gain, which has swap left and right button. So I did that, so now they're naturally panned. Whereas if I panned them the other way, just with the pan knob, it kind of cuts out the right channel and they sound thinner. But this one, it switches it around, so the more dominant channel is on the other side and stays sounding natural. So here they are together. Just kind of a natural way to widen your mix up a little bit. And you can hear over here, I did it with the ride being panned right and all the hi-hats panned left. Yeah, so that's something I like to do a lot. I try to do it in almost every song, having different articulations of the hi-hats panned different directions. I really like how it sounds. Some people might think it's a little much. I think it's great. And here I'll talk about sub bass a little bit. I'm not going to go into side chaining in this video. I'll make another video about that another time, but you're going to be able to hear my side chain a little bit here. So I'm going to talk about these sub fills that I have here in this other part. I'll play a few of them. So you might be able to tell that the 808s that are doing the fills have a lot of high and mid frequency in them. So I added this EQ onto the Contact Urban 808 library, which is third party. It's not Native Instruments. I highly recommend it. It's great. Super fat, clean 808s. But I boosted the highs with this SSL EQ, which is really nice sounding. So the highs at 5K are boosted almost all the way to give it almost like a clicky noise. The high mid frequencies are boosted at around 1,000 hertz. Low mids boosted to just to kind of hype up the 808s a bunch. So the fills have all that going on, where the main 808 that goes on through everything else still has that EQ, but then I put another EQ on top and cut everything above 261. So it's way more subdued, and there's way more room for everything else in the mix with that one going on. But these little fills, I left space for them to poke through. So let's hear it in the context of everything. Yeah, so I think it's important, especially with these little 808 fills, to let them have a very full spectrum frequency content. I also like to bounce them to audio so I can cut them precisely so it stops right when the next sub bass note starts. You don't want overlapping sub bass notes. That always kind of sounds funky. But yeah, that might be everything I wanted to cover in this track specifically. We can listen to this synth right here. It's got a lot of stereo information. It helps widen things up. You can tell it's just bouncing back and forth between right and left, which is really useful. I love using things like that. Another way to get your mix really wide. All right, I think I'm ready to open up this other track, and we can talk about that. So what I'm going to cover in this next track is a technique that I use on my guitars almost every time that I record them. And what I will do is basically duplicate my recording, pan one hard right and one hard left, and do different processing on each side. So that creates some stereo width between them. And what I will do with that is a lot of times have it be just like acoustic on one side, and then on the other side have it be distorted or have some sort of other effects going on to kind of make a really thick tone between them, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. So let's find the guitars. I think they're right here. I'm going to make sure this is up to level for consistency. There we go. All right, so here's the guitars. Let's start with this one, which is panned left. You can hear it's mostly the acoustic tone. It's got a little bit of saturation, a little bit of grit. And then we'll go to the right. It's the same recording, but it's really distorted. I have probably a UAD amp emulation on it, just really distorting it. Yeah, I used the UAD Fender here and pushed it pretty hard. But together, you can hear that they kind of make a really nice wide sound. automation for that noise got messed up because of where I started it. It's not supposed to have that high frequency little... Yeah, so this concept, I would say, isn't specific to guitars. It works really well on guitars, especially acoustic, and that's what I use it on a lot. But I would say you could try it on lots of different stuff. You could try it on synths, you could try it on other organic instruments. Don't be afraid to experiment, and it's a good way to make things sound super wide. So I did it again here later, but this time I went for a full distorted guitar tone, but still did the same thing where the processing is different on the right and left channels to kind of create some space. So here's the left channel. That one has a little bit more of like a high timbre. This one is the right. Definitely has more low mids, thicker. So together, yeah, the difference in the grit between the right and left channel really sounds amazing to me, and I love using this technique to create wideness, especially in my guitar tones. But I've experimented with it with synths and stuff too. You can get some cool stuff. Definitely, don't feel like this is something you can only do to guitars. I would try to do it to anything and just see what happens. Here's that section in context. Yeah, so I think that is all I wanted to cover in this video. I hope it helps you guys out some. Definitely leave me some feedback. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. And I will be making more of these for sure. So thanks guys. I'll be around.